Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I remember exactly when I first heard the overhead chime that night. It was right after my break, around 2:15 a.m. The waiting room's lights were dimmed, and the corridors were unusually quiet for a hospital. Our local news had been running strange advisories throughout the evening, but no one seemed to take them too seriously at first. We'd had busy nights before, out-of-control fevers, a few badly injured folks from road mishaps, but nothing prepared us for the next few hours. By the end of my shift, the phrase, hospital lockdown, would take on a whole new meaning, and the words, emergency alert, zombie outbreak, and infected would be seared into my mind forever. But to truly understand what happened here, we need to rewind, back to where it all began, to the start of what I thought would be just another ordinary shift. It began like any other night in the emergency department. My role as an overnight intern usually involved checking vital signs, triaging patients, and navigating the steady hum of controlled chaos. I was still finding my footing in the fast-paced world of hospital work, where the biggest challenges often came from reassuring worried families and juggling endless tasks. But from the moment I walked through those sliding doors, something felt off. A subtle tension lingered in the air, almost imperceptible at first, but impossible to ignore as the night went on. Earlier in the evening, I'd caught a snippet of an emergency alert on the radio as I parked my car. It was a scratchy, monotone voice warning citizens to stay indoors. Some bizarre generalized message about an unknown contagion sweeping through parts of the city. I turned off the radio before I could catch the entire broadcast. I figured it was just another local scare that would be clarified later. The hospital lobby was filled with a gentle hum of overhead lights, the occasional beep from monitors, and the low chatter of on-duty staff. But everyone seemed restless. Almost every conversation I caught included the words strange bites or agitated behavior. One of the senior nurses, Janice, pulled me aside as soon as I walked in. "Hey, have you heard what's happening out there?" she asked, eyes darting around. "They're saying it's some kind of widespread infection. People are acting wild like not themselves." I shrugged. "I heard an emergency alert broadcast in my car, but I didn't get the details." Janice nodded, lowering her voice. "Trust me, something's going on. We've had calls from paramedics about people attacking strangers on the street. Some are calling it a zombie outbreak." She forced a small, nervous laugh as she said the word zombie, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Just be ready. I think it might be a long night." For the first hour, things felt almost normal. We had the usual stream of minor cases, sprained ankles, lingering coughs, a child with a mild rash. But then, around midnight, the ambulance bay doors rattled as paramedics rushed in a patient on a stretcher. The man was strapped down, thrashing and mumbling. His eyes were unfocused and he kept snapping at the air. I'd never seen anything like it. "Male, mid-30s, one of the paramedics yelled. "Found wandering in traffic. Possible bite marks on his arm. Became aggressive en route." The paramedic's voice shook with just a hint of unease. We rapidly moved the patient into a bed in a curtained-off area, and 2 security guards helped keep him from lashing out. Although the paramedic had said bite marks, I only caught a glimpse. The man's sleeve was torn, and there was a crusty outline on his forearm. Part of me wanted to look closer, but I had to help keep the patient still so a doctor could examine him. Over the next half hour, more paramedics arrived, each with a similar story. Individuals found disoriented and combative, some with strange injuries that looked suspiciously like they came from human teeth. One older woman was trembling so hard that we had to wrap her in blankets to keep her from shivering off the bed. Another man, as soon as he was unstrapped, tried to bite a nurse. We managed to secure him before he hurt anyone, but it sent everyone's nerves skyrocketing. It was around 1:30 a.m. when a second overhead announcement came on the intercom. A stern, automated voice echoed through the hallways. Attention all staff, this is an emergency alert. The hospital is moving to partial lockdown. All available personnel, please report to your stations. At that point, panic rippled through both patients and staff. We'd never had an emergency alert or lockdown quite like this. Some staff members tried calling home, but cellular networks started getting spotty. As for the landlines, every time we dialed out, we got nothing but a busy signal. My job involved basic triage, so I had to remain near the entrance. The sliding doors hissed open and shut, letting in frantic people who claimed to have been attacked by neighbors or strangers on the street. They used words like unsteady walk, vacant eyes, and raspy groaning. I started to hear hushed whispers among staff. They're like zombies. Is this some sort of zombie outbreak? I even spotted someone wearing a torn shirt that read Zombie Marathon 5K, ironically, as though the entire situation were some cosmic joke. The hospital's overhead lights flickered for a moment, making everyone freeze. Then the generator kicked in, returning the corridor to its usual sterile glow. By now, the waiting area was full of uneasy survivors who'd fled their homes. A few moaned about odd fevers. Others had shallow scratches on their arms or strange bruising. They all wore the same expression, anxiety mixed with exhaustion. I tried to do my part, swabbing wounds, bandaging shallow cuts, and checking vital signs. But each time I came across someone with that vacant look and unexplained marks, a chill ran down my spine. That's when I noticed how the triage software on my tablet was glitching. Or maybe it was just overwhelmed by the input. We'd never had so many incidents so fast, all with the same pattern of bite wounds, agitation, and feverish symptoms. At about 2:15 a.m., the overhead speakers crackled again. This time, the message sent a jolt through every corridor. Attention! We have received an emergency alert from local authorities. A potential infection event is in progress outside. A city-wide curfew is now in effect. This facility is moving to a full lockdown. No one may leave or enter until further notice. My stomach dropped. I exchanged worried looks with a few co-workers. The steel shutters in front of the emergency department's main entrance began to lower, accompanied by a grinding mechanical hum. Visitors rushed to the doors protesting, but security staff did their best to maintain order. An uneasy hush fell over the entire waiting area. Being locked in a hospital could be reassuring if you trust that help is on the way, but rumors of a zombie outbreak quickly overshadowed any sense of safety. The word infected was tossed around whenever a new patient arrived with a glassy stare or tried to attack staff. People whispered that the infection spread through bites. Others insisted it was airborne. No one really knew. All we had were pieces of a terrifying puzzle. The newly arrived patients, those showing the worst signs, were taken to the isolation wing. I followed a doctor, Dr. Malik, down a dim corridor to see if I could assist. By then, the lights were flickering on and off, probably from the surge in power usage. We found ourselves stepping over rolling gurneys and knocked over IV stands, trying to get to the quarantine area. We turned a corner and nearly collided with a nurse who was sprinting toward us. She was breathless, eyes wide with panic. "They're coming through," she gasped. "Who?" Dr. Malik demanded, leaning in. "The patients," she said, swallowing hard. "Some broke loose, and they're attacking people." My mind raced. I imagined the newly infected patients staggering out of their beds, trying to find a way to feed their strange, aggressive impulses. Even though I'd only heard the word zombies whispered, my heart pounded, as if that label might be true. Dr. Malik muttered a quick plan. "We'll barricade the corridor near the isolation wing. You," he pointed at me, "help me gather supplies. We may need to treat injuries here." We rushed into a nearby storage room. Inside were rows of boxes filled with gauze, gloves, face shields, and other protective gear. A few battery-powered lanterns were shoved in a corner. I grabbed as many supplies as I could carry, but my eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting it to swing open with an infected figure behind it. Once we returned to the corridor, more staff had arrived to help block the passage leading to the isolation area. We pushed wheelchairs, cabinets, and anything else we could find to create a makeshift barricade. Over the top, I could see a flicker of movement, silhouettes swaying back and forth in the darkness. A muffled moan came from down the hall, followed by a sharp bang, then another. Whatever was on the other side was definitely trying to get through. A security guard, Martinez, hollered, "Everyone back away! If they break down this barricade, we'll need to retreat to a secure location." The banging intensified. My pulse was racing so fast I could hardly stand still. A nurse beside me trembled, clutching a pair of scissors. It was a feeble defense, but at least it was something. Then, all at once, the noise subsided. Just faint shuffling sounds remained. It was as if the infected had wandered off, but that kind of silence in a situation like this only ramped up the tension. Dr. Malik turned to me, voice low. "We should get back to the main floor. We need to regroup, see if we can figure out how to handle the growing chaos." I nodded, swallowing my fear. Together, we left the barricade in place and made our way back. The halls felt claustrophobic, the white fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The elevator was out of service. We tiptoed down the stairwell, where overhead announcements continued on a loop. "This is an emergency alert. We are experiencing an unknown contagion. Please remain calm, seek shelter inside and await further instructions." Returning to the triage area, we found a new wave of confusion. Cell phones had lost service completely. The wall-mounted TVs which normally displayed the news were filled with static. A single emergency broadcast repeated on a black screen. "Zombie outbreak in your area. Seek immediate shelter." Some people slumped in chairs, eyes glazed with terror or fatigue. A few silently cried, hugging loved ones. Others tried to remain calm, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Staff members were short-tempered, and medical supplies were dwindling. Desperate for information, Janice tried the landlines again. Still busy. She tried fiddling with the hospital's internal communication system, but all she got was an endless beep. It was as though the entire world outside had gone dark. Amid the chaos, I spotted Dr. Malik again, speaking in hushed tones with an administrator. I was close enough to catch snippets. "The infection is spreading faster than we can contain. Can't keep them locked up forever. We don't have the resources." Their faces were grim. Just then, a commotion erupted. A man in tattered clothes stumbled from behind a curtain, eyes distant. He lurched toward a group of people waiting on a row of chairs. Security dashed forward, restraining him before he could harm anyone. But in the struggle, he bit one of the guards on the hand. A loud gasp echoed through the area. The guard staggered back, clutching his injury. We quickly ushered the infected man away, but the guard looked pale, uncertain. Someone offered to bandage his hand, but we all exchanged worried looks. We had seen how quickly the infection could develop. Would he remain himself? Or was it only a matter of time? Around 3 a.m., the backup generators began flickering more frequently. The overhead lights dimmed to conserve power. Dr. Malik led a small team, including me, to a second-story window to see if we could get any sense of what was happening outside. We found a dusty corridor with a wide window that overlooked the parking lot. What we saw made my heart sink. The streets were oddly quiet, lit only by pale street lamps. Parked cars were scattered haphazardly. A few distant figures lurched aimlessly along the sidewalks, very likely more infected. The hospital parking area itself was almost deserted, except for a single ambulance that sat idle near the bay doors. Its interior lights flickered on and off, as if someone had left them in the middle of an emergency run. No sirens blared, no horns honked. The city felt abandoned. Occasionally, we caught glimpses of movement between the rows of cars. Shadowy shapes scurrying, probably in search of help, or maybe something more sinister. It was impossible to tell. Without cell service or stable communication, we had no idea how widespread the crisis might be. But if the official emergency alert was urging everyone to stay indoors, then it had to be serious. Maybe it was everywhere. Suddenly, a loud crash jolted us back to reality. It sounded like something heavy had fallen on the floor below. A moment later, screams echoed up the stairwell. Without hesitation, we sprinted down to investigate. We arrived just in time to see two infected individuals staggering through the triage area. The makeshift barricade we'd originally erected near the isolation wing must have failed somewhere else, or perhaps they found another route. People scattered in all directions. Some staff members tried to contain the threat. Others simply ran. One of the intruders, a gaunt man with vacant eyes, moved unsteadily toward a cluster of cowering bystanders. As we approached, we saw that his clothing was torn in several places. The second intruder, a woman with a glazed stare, stumbled behind him. I could see a long scratch on her forearm. My heart pounded so fiercely I could feel it in my temples. Dr. Malik signaled for me to help guide the frightened bystanders into a nearby hallway. While security tried to wrangle the infected, we herded about a dozen people toward a safer area. The hospital's generator lights flickered ominously, casting jumping shadows on the walls. We ended up near the pediatric ward, which was eerily quiet. Most children had been discharged earlier to clear space, so the corridors were deserted. Dr. Malik led us into a small waiting room and quietly closed the door behind us. Once inside, we locked the door with an old-fashioned key we found at the nurse's station. The group let out a collective sigh of relief, but a heavy silence settled soon after. Everyone was thinking the same thing. How do we get out of this? Are we truly safe here? The small waiting room had a television mounted on the wall, but it only displayed the same text-based emergency alert message about a zombie outbreak. It advised people to seek shelter and avoid contact with the infected. We flipped through other channels, static, and more static. Dr. Malik took a quick inventory of supplies. We found some bottled water and a few energy bars in a vending machine. Most importantly, we still had a stash of medical kits. It wasn't much, but at least we could dress wounds and keep ourselves hydrated. A few others from our group introduced themselves. Margaret, a middle-aged woman whose spouse was stuck at home. Derek, a man who had been visiting his cousin in the hospital. And Tiana, a nurse's aide who was stranded after missing her ride. Each told a snippet of their story, how they'd witnessed strange attacks, how the city seemed to be in turmoil, how an emergency alert system had urged everyone to stay indoors. No one was sure if more help was coming. For a little while we sat there in tense silence, listening for any sign of movement outside. The overhead lights dipped again, and the generator rumbled angrily from somewhere beneath the floors. Suddenly, we heard a faint tapping at the door. Everyone froze. Tiana motioned for us to be quiet. We heard a soft scraping sound. Another tap. Then silence. The handle jiggled. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Slowly, Dr. Malik approached the door, pressing his ear against it. "Who's there?" he called softly. At first, no response. Then came a weak voice. "Please, help me." Margaret gasped. "It's a survivor," she whispered, and immediately moved toward the door. Dr. Malik hesitated. We had no way of knowing who was truly outside, or what condition they might be in. "Stay back," he told Margaret. To the person outside he said, "Are you alone?" "Yes," came the voice, ragged and unsure. "I'm just hurt. Please let me in." The moral dilemma weighed heavily on all of us. Could we risk letting in someone who might be infected? On the other hand, could we leave someone out there potentially injured and helpless? Dr. Malik looked at me, eyebrows furrowed. He wanted my input. My mind raced as I considered the options. Finally, I nodded. "Open the door, but carefully," I said. "We can't abandon someone who might need help." We positioned ourselves, ready to secure the door if needed. Tiana stood behind it. Margaret braced herself against a chair, and I stood with a rolled-up blanket. Hardly a perfect defense, but it was something. Dr. Malik slowly turned the key and cracked the door open. A young woman stumbled inside, leaning heavily on the doorframe. She was breathing in shallow gasps. I caught sight of her arm. It was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. stained with something dark. She looked scared out of her mind. "Thank you," she breathed. We shut and locked the door behind her. Tiana guided her to a nearby chair, while I rummaged through our supply kit. The woman introduced herself as Lacey. She'd been in the hospital earlier that day for a minor procedure, only to get stuck when the lockdown was announced. At some point, she got separated from everyone else. "Did you get bit?" Derek asked, cautiously eyeing her bandaged arm. She shook her head, wincing. "No, I cut myself on a broken door handle, trying to escape someone who was chasing me." He had this strange blank look. Dr. Malik studied her carefully, before gently removing the makeshift bandage. The wound looked like a jagged cut, not a bite. We breathed a small sigh of relief, though we couldn't be entirely certain. We disinfected it, wrapped it with a sterile dressing, and offered her some water. She sipped gratefully. While we tended to Lacey, the tension outside seemed to ramp up again. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by muffled scraping sounds. It sounded like more than one presence. Then, a low groan drifted through the crack beneath the door. My blood turned cold. Tiana flicked off the light switch in our waiting room, plunging us into relative darkness, save for the red glow of the exit sign. We held our breath as shadows slid past the door. The handle rattled once, twice, then stopped. We prayed whoever, or whatever was out there would move on. Finally, the footsteps receded. Our group remained silent, straining to hear any clue about the corridor's safety. When we were reasonably sure the threat had passed, Dr. Malik motioned for us to gather around. "We can't stay here forever," he whispered. "We need to find a safer part of the hospital or get out. This place isn't secure if the infected roam the halls." "But how can we leave?" Margaret asked, voice shaking. "We can't just unlock those doors and walk into a hallway full of zombies." The word zombies hung in the air, making the moment feel surreal. None of us truly wanted to believe we were dealing with a zombie outbreak, yet we'd witnessed enough to know something unnatural was happening. "We'll wait until it's quieter," Dr. Malik explained. "Maybe we can head for the roof or try to access the secure wing. If we can barricade ourselves properly, we might hold out until help arrives." Another hour crept by. The only sounds were our breathing and the occasional drip of a faulty pipe. At around 4:15 a.m., we mustered the courage to open the door and peek outside. The corridor was dim, illuminated only by emergency lights. The silence was suffocating. Dr. Malik led the way, followed by Tiana. The rest of us trailed behind, trying to move as quietly as possible. Our plan was to reach the older section of the hospital, which had fewer patient rooms and thicker doors. We thought it might be easier to fortify. We shuffled through the hallway, passing closed patient rooms. Some were dark and silent. Others had faint rustling sounds within, as if something moved in the shadows. Occasionally, a low moan seeped beneath a door. We tried not to linger or imagine the worst. Suddenly, Lacey clutched my arm. "Did you hear that?" she hissed. In the distance, a set of double doors slammed open. We froze. Through the gloom, we saw fleeting shapes. 1, 2, maybe 3 figures. They moved jerkily with stiff limbs, as if they were uncertain how to walk. My mind conjured the word zombies again, despite my reluctance to call them that. We pressed ourselves against the wall, praying they wouldn't notice us. My heart pounded so hard it almost drowned out the faint, raspy groans that now echoed in the corridor. The group of infected, if that's what they were, swayed from side to side, drifting in our general direction. I held my breath until my lungs burned. One of the figures paused just a few yards from us, head tilting as if listening. I worried it could hear the pounding of my heart. Then, it stumbled onward, and the group disappeared around a bend. Dr. Malik gestured for us to keep moving. We hurried through a side door that opened into a stairwell, eager to put distance between us and the infected. The metal steps groaned under our feet, each clang making me wince. In a crisis, every noise felt like a beacon. We reached the top floor of the old wing. The hallway here smelled stale, like it hadn't been used in weeks. Our flashlights, handheld beams from our emergency kits, revealed peeling wallpaper and dusty tile floors. Most of the patient rooms in this area were shuttered or used for storage. It was our best chance at a secure hideout. Dr. Malik led us to a large room that once served as a meeting area. It had heavy double doors, and we quickly found furniture inside to block the entrance. Once barricaded, we flicked on a few battery-powered lanterns, illuminating the space enough to see each other's exhausted faces. Just as we were about to settle in, Tiana let out a small cry. We all turned to see her pointing at a shape in the corner. It was a figure slumped against the wall, motionless. A caretaker's uniform. Dr. Malik approached cautiously, his expression grave. The caretaker looked pale and was not moving. We edged closer, half expecting him to stir. Dr. Malik crouched down, pressing 2 fingers to the caretaker's neck for a pulse. After a few seconds, he turned to us and shook his head. No movement, no sign of life. We all backed away, a somber realization settling over us. We debated what to do with the body. Dr. Malik advised we cover it with a sheet. The caretaker didn't appear to be infected in a typical sense, but we couldn't be entirely sure. It felt disrespectful just to leave him there, but we had no alternative. While moving a cabinet to strengthen our barricade, we heard muffled voices outside. We froze, unsure if it was the infected or other survivors. Then we caught a word. "Anyone in there?" Derek, the visitor who'd been quiet most of the time, rushed to the door. "We're survivors, are you?" A brief pause. "We are. We were trying to find a safe spot. Let us in." Cautious as ever, Dr. Malik slid aside a chair and cracked the door open. 2 people, one wearing scrubs, the other in casual clothes, slipped into the room. The one in scrubs looked familiar. Sarah, a nurse from the night shift. The other was a volunteer named Henry. Relief washed over our group at the sight of more friendly faces. Sarah was breathless, but she managed to speak. We barricaded part of the corridor, but more of those zombie-like people are wandering around. We barely got away. We helped them settle in. Henry had bruises on his arms from a close call with an infected. Sarah recounted how the entire lower level was overrun. She warned that the cafeteria area was no longer safe. It seemed the hospital had become a labyrinth of locked doors and roaming threats. Our combined group now numbered 8. Dr. Malik reasoned that waiting here indefinitely might not be wise, given the failing power and limited resources. Sarah mentioned that the roof access in this old wing was sometimes unlocked for maintenance. If we reached the roof, maybe we could signal for help, or at least avoid direct contact with the infected. But fear gnawed at each of us. What if the roof was overrun too, or if the city was beyond rescue? Ultimately, we decided our best bet was to try. Dawn was still hours away, but maybe the faint morning light would make it safer to find a way out. We unblocked the door as quietly as possible and stepped back into the dark corridor. The hush around us felt heavier than ever. An occasional clang echoed from somewhere in the building. We navigated through the hallway, following Sarah's direction toward the stairwell that led to the maintenance area. Each door we passed felt like a potential hazard. Every corner could hide an infected, waiting to lurch forward. At one point, we heard a door slam on a lower level, followed by frantic footfalls. We never found out if it was a survivor fleeing or a group of infected shuffling around. We reached a sign reading, "Roof access, maintenance personnel only." Sarah fished a small key from her pocket. Apparently she'd grabbed it earlier, anticipating she might need to hide somewhere. She inserted it into the lock, and the door clicked open. Inside was a narrow set of concrete steps. A stale draft wafted down, carrying the musty smell of old mop buckets and dust. Our lantern beams danced along the walls. The tension was suffocating. Then, from behind us, we heard a sudden moan, deep, guttural. We spun around to see a figure at the bottom of the steps. It was an infected hospital staff member, uniform stained with something that made it look discolored in the dim light. They swayed, then lunged for the door. We pushed it shut with a collective shove, hearts hammering. The figure crashed into the door, letting out another rasping groan. We could feel the wood vibrating under the impact. Henry jammed a metal rod through the handle to barricade it. For now, we were safe on the stairwell side, but we knew it might not hold if more infected arrived. We climbed the final steps. At the top was another heavy door that led outside. Sarah turned the knob, and it opened with a rusty creak. A cool breeze swept over us as we stepped onto the roof. The night sky stretched overhead, and the cityscape lay in darkness except for a few flickering streetlights. The cool air on my face was a stark reminder of how claustrophobic the hospital's corridors had been. We explored the rooftop, scanning for any sign of rescue or immediate danger. The faint outline of the horizon hinted that dawn was approaching. Dr. Malik peered over the edge, checking for a safe way down, but we were high up, with no exterior staircase. Helicopter landing pad? We found no sign of one, just tarred surfaces and old vents. A sense of helplessness settled over us. Sure, we'd escaped the immediate threat of the infected inside the building, but the city beyond looked eerily silent. Were we truly safer here? In a small, shed-like structure on the roof, likely for maintenance supplies, we discovered an old portable radio. It had a large antenna and rusted edges. Tiana fiddled with the knobs, trying to find any signal. The device crackled to life at one point, producing bursts of static. We briefly heard something resembling an automated message. "Emergency alert! Zombie outbreak!" Then it fizzled out. We stared at each other, equal parts relieved to hear anything at all, and panicked by the ongoing crisis. Tiana tried adjusting the antenna, searching different frequencies, but the only thing that came through was more static, or an occasional faint beep. Our group sat in a circle, hugging our jackets against the chill breeze. Dr. Malik raised the question again. Do we try to get out of the city, or do we remain here and hope for rescue? Margaret hugged her knees, trembling. What if no one comes? What if this is everywhere? Henry leaned forward. The zombie outbreak might be citywide, maybe even nationwide, but there has to be a military or rescue operation. They wouldn't abandon us. Lacey voiced another concern. We hardly have any food or water, and who knows how long the lockdown will last. Sarah added, if we go back down, we risk running into more infected. We weighed the pros and cons. With the hospital on lockdown, the exits might be sealed. Even if we managed to leave, the streets might be overrun. Our supplies were running low, but at least we had some shelter on the roof. The conversation went in circles, each argument punctuated by the distant groans we could still hear echoing from the stairwell. Time passed slowly. Eventually, the sun's first rays broke over the horizon, bathing the city in a dull, orange glow. From our rooftop vantage point, we saw smoke rising from a few blocks away, as if a building had caught fire. The emptiness of the streets in the early light was haunting. No cars moving, no people walking, just a hush that made it feel like the entire world was holding its breath. We gathered near the edge of the roof. A quiet understanding passed between us. No matter which path we chose, staying here or attempting an escape, the future was uncertain. The radio remained useless. The hospital below was still crawling with infected, and beyond the hospital grounds, who knew what horrors might be unfolding? As we stood there, Dr. Malik finally spoke up, his tone resolute, yet tinged with desperation. We can't just wait. Sooner or later, we'll need food, medical supplies, and a safer place. We either try to make a run for it or find a secure zone inside the hospital, but we can't stay on this rooftop indefinitely. I glanced around at the others. Margaret, Tiana, Derek, Lacey, Henry, Sarah. Their expressions reflected the same worry I felt. None of us wanted to descend into the building again, but staying here was no guarantee of rescue. We were caught in a lose-lose scenario, with the entire city possibly in the grip of a zombie outbreak. What do we do? Tiana asked, voice shaking. Dr. Malik looked at me, searching for support. I felt a lump in my throat as I tried to muster something that felt like courage. "We gather what we can," I said, "and decide together." A muffled crash rose from below, as if something large had just collapsed in the hospital interior. It served as a stark reminder that danger was still close. The morning breeze swept over us, carrying the tang of smoke and the faint echo of distant sirens. And that's where our story hangs. We stand on the roof of a locked-down hospital, with a few supplies and a handful of survivors, facing an uncertain world. Outside, an emergency alert echoes across static-filled airwaves. Inside, the hallways echo with the groans of the infected. We are caught between two choices, neither offering a clear path to safety. No one knows how long the lockdown will last. No one knows if reinforcements will ever come. We've glimpsed the horrors below, the moaning shapes that shuffle through corridors once filled with life. We've heard the dire warnings of a zombie outbreak, while feeling the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, help is still out there. We are left standing on the edge of the unknown, the sun rising on a city forever changed, our fate, and the fate of countless others, suspended in the quiet morning air. Will we find a way out? Or are we already out of time? I wish I had a final answer, but the truth is, I don't. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.